It's Internet Secrets. This is a mini version of a full 2-hour workshop, and these are the most important pieces, so we're going to go through them, and we'll have questions later. And that's me. If you have questions, you can write to me. I love answering email questions, so don't hesitate. And what we're going to talk about today is some of the basics of digital format research, which is different than with the hand, writing things down in the library. We're going to define our search criteria. We're going to explore different kinds of search options, and we're going to be able to compare results. And I'll show you all of that in terms of where you're looking for something. We're going to evaluate the credibility of a website, and that's really big news today, as we know that there's a lot of, quote, websites that aren't actually credible. And we're going to learn how to avoid unintentional plagiarism. And I use the word unintentional because nobody really wants to plagiarize. So we're going to talk about the different stages of research. And I have 4 stages. One is we start with gathering our information. Then we're going to select what we have and look at what's relevant to us, because not everything is, and we can all go down those rabbit holes. We're going to process that information into something that we're going to call knowledge, and we're going to find a way to communicate that, and how are we going to deliver that kind of information. So there's a lot going on with research. And another thing that I like to talk about is the difference between data and information. And often people confuse those two, and there is a difference. There we go. So data is a piece of information that we're going to use, and that's really a point-by-point piece that will actually evolve into information. What happened to everything there? So if we want to define that, it's something that we've picked out, and I use it as an example of a percentage of military veterans in the United States. That's a piece of data. And then what do we do with it? We use that in a context. So that way we don't confuse our research in terms of, what is this information and how are we going to use it and how do we analyze it? So this is, I think, the best graphic for defining the difference. And I know this is maybe, gets a little on a fine point, but it's important when you're doing research so you know what you're looking for and what it means. And so if we have our point of data down to the bottom left, we're going to connect that with other pieces of information in the center. And we understand what we're looking for. The number of veterans in California is a piece of data, but what does it mean? Why is it important? How am I going to use that information? Is it the resources? Is it the Veterans Administration? Is it the healthcare? What does that piece of data mean? And that's important when you're doing research.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Now, this is a fun word, disambiguation. Of course, that means what's ambiguous. One of the biggest problems people have, and I think Bill was talking about that, is when he was looking for something, he wasn't finding the information he thought was relevant. And this is another little rabbit hole that I go down, but it really makes a difference. If you don't ask the right question, you're not going to get the right answer. And that's really critical, especially when you're on Google, because you can put in a piece of information and you're going to find all kinds of stuff that isn't relevant to what you were looking for. So it's important that you use the words that are going to give you the information you're looking for. Here's an example. The word capital. It has 4 definitions. So if I just put in capital, I'm going to be, all over the place with what I'm looking for, and it may not be relevant. So how do we make this relevant? I'm going to show you. When we're looking into the web, we're going to look at, where we are on the internet and where we're looking. So all of you, I think you've heard of the dark web. There's also the deep web. And when we're looking for that piece of information, we need to know where we're going with it. And I'm going to talk a little more about that later. So here's another example of that. If you're looking for something, if you're going to be on the surface, you're only going to get certain elements of information. If you go deeper, then you're going to find more. And that's going to be an important piece on your research. So I wanted to get into the different kinds of internet that are, and that's going to also play a part on how you find your research. And there's different kinds of internet places to go. I lost my relative there. So if you're looking for something, you might be in an opaque web and you're not going to get that information because you don't have the availability to find that. And it's not going to be included in your internet search. There's the private web, and the private web excludes you unless you are signed on to that. So again, you can put in your piece of information and you're not going to get it because you're not allowed into that website. There's a proprietary web, and that's for your university, and that's only accessible by registration. So all of these things get in the way of you finding the information you want. So you need to know that, and you're excluded from places, and that's another frustration in terms of not being able to find your information. And then the invisible web, and that's the one we were talking about that's very, very deep, and you have to use a very specific kind of search to find that. And we're getting to that place, so just don't be frustrated. We're getting there. Okay. So here's some search engines that will allow you to find some of that sort of amorphic information that you're looking for. And this slide deck is available to everybody, so you don't have to write it all down. But these are different kinds of search engines that will help you define your search and find the information that you're looking for. I think I have 2 pages of this. Yes. So some of them are interesting. Pibble I used a lot, and that's basically looking for people. We all like to, find out stuff about each other. So some of these you have to sign on and pay for, but it's worth it because you're actually going to cut your information time down because you're going to have access to resources you wouldn't have otherwise in the global Google environment. So I would, recommend looking at some of these. I keep losing that little thing. There it is. All right. Here's another reason where you're not going to find the information you want. Ellie Pariser wrote a great book, and it's called Filter Bubbles. And what's a filter bubble? This is another thing that gets in the way of you finding what you want. Google has analyzed you, knows your politics, knows where you live, knows the kind of things you search for, and it limits your ability to find other information. How do you get out of a filter bubble? You may have to research yourself from Canada, or you may use a different search engine. One of the problems that I have is I'm in California, I'm in the San Francisco Bay Area, I'm a flaming liberal, and when I look up something, it only gives me the information that it thinks I want. So I'm not able to look at other information unless I know how to pop the filter bubble. And the way to do that, one way is to use a different search engine. So maybe I always use Google, maybe I should use Bing, or maybe I should use something else. This is an example of searches from 2 different search engines, and you can see the difference of what it gave me. This was Yahoo, and I put in Egypt. And this is the screenshot of what it gave me. And if I go back, where do I go again? There it is. This is what I got from Google. So you can see the difference in the information that I got from 2 different search engines. So you can play with this and you can put something in there and try different search engines, try Bing, try Google, try Yahoo, whatever, and see the different results. And that will be very important to you to know why you're not getting the information or why you're getting certain kinds of information. And that's a fun exercise that I encourage you to do to see what happens and to understand the search bubble that you're involved in, the filters that are on top of what you're looking for and why you may not be finding what you want. So now I'm going to talk about search strings, and this goes right back to what we were talking about before in trying to find information. And if you may be familiar with search strings, this is also very, very, very important in trying to find your information and why Bill was not able to find what he wanted because he wasn't putting in the right question. Let me go again. There it is. Okay. So this is another search string. Here's some others, and these you use these for search engines, directories, and portals. They're not the same thing. So when we're looking, this is another list that you'll get in terms of search strings and the different kinds of ways to find something. One of the best ways, if you really want to cast a wide net, is the wildcard search, and that's an asterisk. And that will basically allow you to do a very broad search. If you want to do date, then you just put in dates. Exact, you use quotations around it. If you want a blog, you put in URL and then colon and then what you're looking for. File search is pretty, explanatory. The safe search, if you have children and you want to make sure if you're looking for something that you don't want anything they don't want to see, you basically write safe search, colon, and then what you're looking for, the subject matter. The link search is pretty explanatory. The site search, again, you just say you want a site and colon, and then what you're looking for. So this all goes back to how do I find the information I'm looking for? How do I use the right search string? How do I phrase it? And how do I keep ambiguous words out of my search? So here's an example of, using a search string. I use baking and potato and the kinds of things that come up, which are going to be very different to something else. There we go. Sorry. So here's a Boolean search, bake plus potato plus recipe. And I get different kinds of things when I'm doing that kind of a search. If you use quotation marks, then I'm going to get something exact because that's going to give me the exact phrase I'm looking for, and you want to use quotation marks around that. So when I put in FBI counterintelligence, these are the various things I got. This is exactly what I was looking for. I was looking for something that was very pertinent to FBI counterintelligence. If I had just put in FBI, I wouldn't have gotten all of this. So again, to get the information you want, you need to use all these various elements to cut your source down to get it exactly to what you want. So you may be familiar with the Boolean search, which is another thing that's fairly broad. You don't need quotation marks, but you want something plus something, or something less than, or something that equals that. So here's one I use for depression. If I was looking for the Great Depression, if I just put in depression, this is the kind of thing that I would get. This is another one. This is the wildcard search. And San Francisco values is considered a very dirty word here several years ago. Maybe it still is. But there it is. So San Francisco values and a wildcard search gave me this. And this is another example of using a search and how broad it became. So I got something about Nancy Pelosi. I got something about media. I got 3 dirty words. It gave me a very broad example. And if I had all the pages, you'd see how far it goes. This is a blog search. In URL is blog. So if you're looking for blogs, you can either go to Google blogs, or if you don't want to do that, you just put in URL and then the colon and what you're looking for. And these are blogs about chickens, and these are all blogs. So that's what I'm looking for. I save myself a lot of time in just using in URL, and that's in the list of search strings. So the other thing we want to talk about, of course, not everything is on the internet. It still isn't to this day. And so if you really need to do some heavy research, you can either connect with your library online Or you get your tush over to the library and you do some search there. When I was researching my book, I spent a lot of time at the library because not all the newspapers had been scanned, not everything was there. So that's really important in terms of doing research and getting offline and not being lazy and thinking that everything is there. So the other thing we want to talk about is the credibility of a website, and that's even more critical today than it was a few years ago. And how do we do that? What do we look for? You know, who's got an agenda? Because if you're doing internet research, you want to be sure that what you're finding is really credible information. And what's the agenda for somebody behind it? What's the scope of the site? And are there dates on it? This is a little thing that I use. It's the CARS checklist. It's very, very basic, but it really talks about the important things you need to look for. So if you're doing research online, you want to look at this to make sure that your source is relevant and it's easy to do. So one of the things we want to look for online, and I can't stress this enough because as a journalist, and I do search online, I have to be very, very, very careful that the sources that I'm looking at, you know, are relevant. And if you can't do these things, if you can't answer these questions, then I would recommend not using that as a source. The other thing, finally, is plagiarism, and that is all over the place. And as a researcher and a writer, you want to be very, very careful that what you take, you validate and you credit. So one of the ways you do this, and on Huffington Post, one of the ways that they use that is links. And you can link to something that you're talking about that's very easy to do today, but you want to make sure that you do it, and you want to make sure that you credit it, or you paraphrase or you rewrite something that's in your words. There's a lot of plagiarism sites online. I use them for myself because I want to make sure that nothing slipped through the cracks, and I recommend that highly. So these are the things you need to do when you're taking sources online, when you're doing your research. You want to make sure that you read everything and you know that it's credible, and you look for, you know, either quotations or paraphrases, and you highlight that information because that's your credibility, that's your ethics, and we always want to protect our ethics, you know, highly. So when we're doing all of this searching online, we need to know what we're doing and that we credit that information. Another way to check on a website, if there's, you know, it's an old date, if it's, you know, maybe 2000, you can go to the Wayback Machine and find out what happened to that website and is it still really relevant to you. So these are the sources that I used to put the larger internet research workshop together. And these are very helpful, and I recommend that, you know, you're going to want to get these when you get the slide deck together and use these for your own research because it's important, and these are the things, the sources that I use to put this together. Okay, so that's that.
That was really wonderful. Thank you, Geri. I've just got a mountain of notes, and then I realised that I've also got the slides, and this will be recorded. But that was really interesting. I noticed a few people popped up in the chat box and asked about using the private tab. Bill's going flat for those of you who can't see the chat box. Yeah, using a private tab or that incognito tab that Chrome has. Does that still work for when you were talking about Google filtering what we see? Yes. Can we get past that using that incognito tab?
I think that would help. Yeah, it certainly would try it. You know, the internet, you know, knows all about us. And I think if you can try ways, the incognito tab, you can try that. I mean, anything is worth trying in order to, you know, to pop the bubble. I think that's probably one of the most frustrating things that I go through is, you know, trying to find out other information or try to say that I'm in France. And do that. So yeah, I would try that. That would probably help. Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So I'm going to open it up. Thank you very much. Like I said, we are on a bit of a limited time screen, so if it does cut out, I'm going to apologise now. This recording will be available on Bill Ballou's forum, in a couple of hours or so, and it should also be available on YouTube. So who's got a question? Please unmute yourself, unless, of course, your cat is coming crying like mine did. We're going to kill it soon. And, yeah, and please, Bill's raised his hand, so please go ahead, Bill. Are you there, Bill?
I can't hear him.
Oh, I'm going to unmute you, Bill. There you go.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Yes,
Yes.
thank you.
All right, so thanks for picking on me, Geri. I really appreciate it. I like being picked on. No, seriously, thanks for doing that to me. This is great information. There's lots and lots of good stuff there. You know, there's a long list of things to go play with just when you try and search. But
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the problem I was having. And so I'm trying to remember the specifics. I was reading about an author who was writing about her kids. And I'm weird like this. I was just curious, when did this person get married, this author? And when were her kids born? Were they born out of wedlock? Because that's kind of what the topic of her book was. And so I knew the author's name and I knew her kid's name. So I typed in, when was author's name's kid? I used the specific names. When was this kid's birth date? And sure enough, I got very specific results. And I clicked on those results. And the top 10 results were people.com or, you know, find out who knows you.com or something like that. And it would have the name of that author's kid, and it had the word birth date, but it said, if you know this information, please put it in here. And that was it. There were not 20 words on the results page for a very specific search. And so I'm thinking, this is just one isolated example, but I have others where I have searched for something very specific, and a page would come up where that information would be, but it was not there. It was like, we're trying to get that information too. Please tell us so we can give it to other people. That's why I was having trouble getting the results. That's what I was trying to refer to in the forum.
Well, I think, you know, and one of the things you can do that's fun is to search on yourself. But some of this information may only be available on people search websites that you have to pay for. They'll give you a certain amount of information for free, but if you want to know more, you pay. But you can find out enormous amounts of gory detail about someone on the people search websites that you pay for. If you did a search on me, I mean, my birthday may not come up, but it certainly will come up and all the other details about where I've lived and what I've done, and if I've done anything illegal on a people search engine. So the dates, the birth dates of the children may not be just readily available online unless you did a deeper search.
Okay, well that makes sense. But what I was saying, I got the results, but they were empty. It had the name, the keywords, but not that piece of information I wanted. And so there were results in the SERPs in the search engine ranking page. There were results there, but they were empty. I'm thinking, wow, you know, these people really scammed that result. So I mean, that's just one isolated example. I see Rev picture. He's definitely got something there here, and I'm looking forward to it.
Good.
Bill, I came across this when I was doing research on my Hutchinson SEO, kind of game I was playing, and I discovered that there are a number of companies, especially trying to think of the word here, but places that itemize and list other people's information. They scrape the internet and build a database of information. There's a number of commercial ones that do this kind of a online yellow pages sort of thing. And they often respond to and fill in answers for things that you ask in a more generic way. So if I were to say, using my own example, if I were to say, who is the best SEO expert in Hutchinson, Kansas, then I would get some company from Taiwan responding, an SEO company in the list, showing up in the list, and they would be saying, they would repeat back the keywords. They would say best SEO expert in Hutchinson, Kansas, and then their information. And somehow I don't know how. I've never looked it up and I've never really worried about it. But somehow some of these places get into the search engines in a dynamic way. And I didn't know that Google supported this, but they can fill a return and create a page, create a response based on the keywords you enter. So it's kind of a dynamic entry instead of a indexed entry. And I don't know whether that's a service you could buy from Google. You're close to Google. You should ask them. Or whether it's something they do that manipulates the search dynamically. Because that's the kind of response you're getting. You're getting these, these aggregators that have the place for a person to be entered, but they don't actually have the data. So they just return the name and a bunch of blanks, and they ask you to fill it in. They're seeking the data they don't have. And it's, I can't imagine that this SEO company in, where did I say, Hong Kong or Taiwan? Taiwan has this, has pages for every city and town in the U.S. that offers their service, creating those pages because they would have to be existing pages, not dynamically created pages if they were going to be indexed. So it seems to me that there's some mechanism either associated with Google or scamming Google that allows them to do that and get into the returns. And it is frustrating when you get those because, that's not an SEO expert in Hutchison. It's an expert in Taiwan serving Hutchison.
Yeah.
Okay, that's a great.
Got a question. Can I just sort of butt in? Jeremy's asked, what is your preferred source for finding statistics? Like how many people within the United States are obese and or vegetarian? So how do you sort of knuckle down to those, I'm assuming Jeremy just wants to find out very quickly, what are the stats on a particular subject? What would you suggest?
One of the best places to get really good statistics is through an organization or a company. I use Pew Research, PEW, because it's clean research. They don't have an agenda. So, looking at some of the major, research companies in your country is one of the best ways. I use Pew a lot because it's highly respected and there's no agenda there. It is what it is.
Okay, so what's the URL, Jerry?
Well, the name, it's the Pew Research Center, and then it's spelled P as in Paul, EW.
Oh, yeah. I've seen that before.
Research Center.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jerry.
Yeah.
Well, what I like to do is of course, like everybody else, I like to use Wikipedia. But when I go to Wikipedia and ask for that information, they'll say there are 3,600 obese people in Sunnyvale, California, and I'm one of them. But then I will not stop at Wikipedia. I will go find their primary resource.
Yes.
So Wikipedia will quote where they got the information. I'll click through to there, and that's generally a really good place to go deeper.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. Yes. Yeah.
So it's like going to a general practitioner to get advice on what specialist you need to go see.
But Wikipedia does have a lot of good resources. That's absolutely right. It's an easy way, to find it.
Yeah, but you can't stop at Wikipedia. You've got to click through to the original source. Otherwise, because Wikipedia is crowd created, and people have agendas when they get in there. I can see that as well.
Yeah. But that's why I usually go to well-respected research companies that don't have an agenda. And Pew is one of the best ones.
Yeah, I think everybody has an agenda, but it's a different subject.
That's a different program, right?
Yep.
Very good. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Are there any other questions for Jerry?
No.
Jerry, Howard's asked, I might also search for US government agencies. I might have more before Trump. I'm not quite sure what that means. Howard, you can unmute yourself and jump in and join the conversation. But I think how long did it take you to compile these lists of these search engines and all the information that you've got there, Jerry?
Well, I was asked by my writing group because I had done so much research on my book, and looking up stuff that was 30 and 40 years old, which is why I spent a lot of time at the library, to talk to people how I did my research, and it evolved from there into a 2-hour workshop where we go through a lot more than what we had here in detail and back and forth. And so it took, I basically took everything I did and put it together. You know, when people say, how do you do what you do? You have to step back and say, well, I just do it. Well, how do you do it? And so I had to really think hard and go through very, very specific pieces of how I put things together. And that evolved into a 2-hour, you know, a deep dive internet research workshop. For Hebrew, I wanted to pull together, you know, the specifics of what I thought. One thing we could talk about is how do you, you know, get through your search. And Bill was very helpful in making me those decisions.
No, it's great. Well, I really appreciate it, and I've certainly learned a lot. Thank you.
Well, I'm not.
I was going to say something about Trump. I was going to say we can't trust the government what they're saying now because of all the lies being caught up already. So that the government might not be as trustworthy as they were before.
Okay, well, that discussion doesn't belong here. So
I can tell you.
Okay.
Can I ask Geri, is that 2-hour workshop, is that available online?
I guess so. I've never given the full 2 hours online. I usually have given it in person, but there's no reason why it couldn't be available online. You know, it's that would have to be something to be worked out. Like I said, it's much more detailed and goes into a lot of other areas and a lot of examples. So
Well, that was great. I'm going to finish up now, Geri. Thank you so much. Thank you to everybody for attending. We can see your website there on the screen, and I'm sure that we'll all be in contact with you with lots of questions. Again, the recording will be at billbaloo.com on his forum. Yes, thank you for coming along, and it's been wonderful. I've learned a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.